Alrighty, everyone. Welcome to the Wednesday interview live stream today at Living Free in Tennessee. I am honored to be on with Anthony Parker, who is a fellow Tennessean, which made me really interested to have him on the show. And I'll be honest, Anthony, I hadn't heard of you till your wife filled out the guest form. Guys, if you want to be on a show like this, fill out the guest form. And if you don't want to fill out the guest form, get your spouse to fill it out for you. That's totally fine. But if you're going to fill out the guest form for somebody, please let them know that you did. Because I've had a couple people like fill it out for random personalities and they're like, we didn't fill that out. So don't do that to me because then that leads to a totally different awkward situation. Anyway, Anthony, tell us like a little bit about how you came to Tennessee and got into homesteading and then learned through that about how lacking the market is in realtors who can serve the homestead seeker.
Sure. So my wife and I were both born and raised in the Midwest in Minnesota, and then we lived in Wisconsin for a while. And anyone who has lived or visited there in the winter will understand why you don't want to be there because winters are very rough.
Because Tuesday.
Yes, winters are pretty rough. And on top of that, it's kind of strange, but for some reason, land and housing is pretty expensive, as is property taxes. And then the growing season is really short. And so we started looking into moving to a different state that would be more friendly for gardening and raising animals and self-sufficiency and stuff. And so we ended up visiting Kentucky and Tennessee, and just really liked Tennessee a lot, and just decided to take a leap of faith and move. And so we started looking all over at different properties. I hadn't really decided on any particular area, but then ran across the house that we're currently in Marshall County, and ended up just jumping on it. Um, and then, like normal for us, we just sort of dived in head first on all things. We got llamas a few months after we moved here, which was an interesting experience. And then we got chickens before we even had a chicken coop. They were roosting in the rafters of our barn, which was
You and I
very
share
messy.
that chicken mistake, just so you know.
Yeah, well, and the really embarrassing part is I told my wife, I was like, okay, I'll build a chicken coop. And I don't really do things like halfway. And so I built them what my dad calls a chicken palace. And so it's basically, I took a shed design and made it into an actual chicken coop. And I even put in walls and we painted it, and it's pretty nice. But it took me a year to build it. So we
I,
had these.
so I'm not as cool as you. I like started with cardboard and then just improved from there.
Yeah, and so we had them. Gosh, where were they staying? I think we had them in a chicken tractor. I think that's what we started out in. But then they discovered the rafters, and we were just like, oh, whatever. And so they go up in the rafters, and I mean, it was probably from our hayloft to the rafters had to have been, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 feet for them to jump, and they figured it out. Most of them figured it out. Some of them are just not. They're very um, they have a lot of trouble with flying, I guess, or floating far, and so that they'd try to jump and they just plop down on the ground. So they ended up roosting on my miter saw, which was a mess. But anyway, tangent there. So we started with chickens and llamas, and then started doing some gardening. Ran into issues with deer, and so I had to put up some temporary fencing. And then we ended up getting cows because our llamas didn't do so well, and they passed away because they have a lot of trouble with parasites. And but we really liked cows, and so we kept expanding our cow herd. And I think at the height of it, we had something like 12. We've sold a few back, and we're working on changing up our herd right now. Um, but it's been a really interesting, fun process, learning everything we need to learn. Um, Doing a lot of work on our property. I was looking at some old photos recently, and uh, it's tough to really visualize how much you've done until you look at some old photos and you're like, wait a minute, that's not there, that's not there, that's not there. And you're like, wow, we actually did do a lot once you actually see it.
Yeah, so
Um,
homestead success tip number 1, take pictures at least once a year of stuff because you'll get these times where you feel downtrodden, overwhelmed, like you're not making a difference on your homestead, like you're not keeping up. And then you go look at photos of a year or 5 ago and you're like, "Oh man, I've done so much." It's a great pick me up.
well, it seems like our goals list never gets shorter. Like we're checking things off it and we've done a lot, but the goals list just, we just keep on getting stuff added to it. So I feel like we're in a pretty good spot right now. I finished up a fencing project last year. We finally got a small greenhouse. We finally have a permanent fence around the garden. So we're doing pretty good. We last year we also got a squeeze chute for the cows, which has been a godsend for loading them up or having the vet out, which, you know, we don't load or have the vet out that often, but when you do, it's really nice. Or like to get a pregnancy checked or something. So that was really nice. Um, but as far as how I got into real estate, so when we started looking for properties, we sort of knew what we wanted to do, but we were completely new to all this. You know, I grew up on 5 acres. My dad gardened. At the time, he didn't keep chickens or cows. My wife's mom gardened as well, but neither of us were really involved in that very much. So there was a lot that we didn't really know, and we ended up finding a very nice lady as our real estate agent, and she didn't really know land that much either, unfortunately. And so we kind of went into the whole home purchasing experience blind. And then on top of it being a home purchase, which we hadn't done before, it was also our first time buying land. And so there was a lot of stuff that we just didn't know. And we ran into a huge amount of issues early on, a lot of home issues. The land, apparently, we got really lucky on, though. It used to be we found out later, it used to be a pig farm. So it's actually been a farm for as long as it's been, you know, settled. Our farmhouse is almost 100 years old, and it used to encompass hundreds of acres all around us, but it's been kind of split off quite a bit. But anyway, because of our bad experience or not ideal experience, you know, I started thinking, you know, I could do, you know, a better job, I guess, and maybe help people through the process to, you know, have a good experience and to feel like they were prepared and that they made a good choice. And so I decided to start doing real estate. And because we, you know, live on a mini farm homestead, I've kind of fallen into a bit of a niche there. You know, I still do neighborhood homes and, you know, spec homes and new homes and all kinds of stuff, but you know, I have a lot of experience in properties from, you know, 5 acres to 165 acres, and, you know, people who are already homesteading to people who are just interested in it. And it's been a lot of fun.
So when you meet somebody who's looking to get into homesteading, do you find yourself doing homestead advising before you ever get into real estate, or how does that work?
Yeah, I do. I mean, there's a lot of people, and it's awesome. I really love that there are so many people who want to get back to the land, who want to get back to our roots as humans. I mean, it's it's sad to me that 1% of the population provides all of our food, because it means nobody has a connection to the land and where our food comes from. You know, I mean, there are legitimate people out there who think chickens come from the store. Like, no, they were raised on a farm and someone had to butcher them and package them and bring them to the store. And so we've just gotten so disconnected with our food. And so it's great that people are coming and wanting to homestead. But so yeah, when I talk to somebody and they're like, yeah, we want to buy land, we want to homestead, you know, the first thing that I'm talking to them about is what do you have in mind? You know, what locations are you looking at? You know, how deep are you planning on diving in this? Have you thought about, you know, your goals for this? And so yeah, I do end up kind of helping them through the process to determine what's the best fit for them. Because
And
a
why
lot of
do you,
people,
I was going to say, why do you think it's so important to talk about your homestead goals before you buy the property? Like, why do you need to know that? Can't you just like get out there and throw some chickens in your rafters and go?
I mean, you can, but it's going to be a learning experience for certain, and it could end up being expensive and or sad depending on how things go. We weren't ready for llamas. We didn't really know a whole lot about llamas, but we just kind of dived in and didn't realize that they had a lot of parasite issues in this area because we live in a really wet climate and they're from a really dry climate. And so we ran into a lot of issues in regards to that. Um, but anyway, there's just so many different factors on how your goals will relate to what kind of property is good for you. If you want to have cows this year, like the same year that you buy, you need to be buying a property that's ready to have cows. If you're going to go and buy a 100% wooded property, it's going to be a year or two before you can prep that to really get cows. Now, if you're interested in pigs, the wooded property is probably okay. Chickens wouldn't really be a problem either. Um, there's a lot of infrastructure that you may need depending on what you want to do. Again, if you want larger animals like cows and horses, you got to think about fencing. Um, they may need some sort of shelter. Our cows are crazy. They love chewing cud out in thunderstorms and they won't go into a barn. But if you have a milking cow or a horse, they're going to need some sort of shelter from that. And then what sort of water do you have? Cows drink a lot of water, and I can tell you from personal experience that your water bill will be very high if you don't have a water source on your property. Unfortunately, while we have a creek, it is it's year round, but in the summer when it gets dry, there's not a lot going on there, so we can't rely on it for watering our cows. And I mean, we can go through 100, 200 gallons of water a day just for the cows. So just things like that to think about and to really hone in your goals to help a knowledgeable real estate agent advise you best on what to get.
And do what do most real estate agents do when they come across somebody who's like, I want 100 acres with a creek that generates this much water for cows, which I want to have this year, which means I need to have a barn. Like, is that something that real estate agents are prepared for, would you say, or no?
I would say most agents aren't. I don't want to throw shade at anybody, but everyone has their areas of expertise and experience. And there is definitely an experience aspect to land. And there are some agents out there that all they do is land, like literally all they do is land. And even in their situation, they may be focusing more on like the hunting aspect of land. Like they sell a lot of hunting properties, and so they may not even they'll probably be more helpful than someone who doesn't know land at all, but maybe they're not quite as in tune with what someone who's new to homesteading may need. And so someone asking those sorts of questions, it's going to be, well, if the real estate agent doesn't really know a whole lot about it, they're not going to really know how to best advise them. If I have a person come to me and say, I want 100 acres, my first question is going to be like, why do you want 100 acres? What are you going to do with 100 acres? Have you ever owned land before? Do you know how much work 100 acres is to maintain? Because trying to get to the root of what it is they're trying to do can help you advise them better. You can homestead on a very little amount of land. You can keep a cow on an acre if you really want to. We know multiple people who've done that. So it's really just a lot of it goes back to what we were talking about before, your goals, and having a real estate agent that can help get to the root of that and advise you best is important.
Okay, so what sorts of things do people forget about when they're thinking about buying land for a homestead? Like, what do they overlook?
Well, it goes back to not knowing what you don't know. Cows needing a lot of water. It makes sense thinking about it after the fact, but you may not think about it up front. And so if you don't have a well or a spring or a pond or some ready access to water, it may become a bit of a pain point in the future. If you were on a property that is off grid, for instance, and all of your water comes from a rainwater collection system. Those cows might drink all that water in the summer, and then what are you going to do? Let's see. You might not realize how important some outbuildings are. Maybe you buy a house and it's not uncommon for houses to not even have a garage. And now you're like, well, I need somewhere to milk my cow, or I got a sick chicken and I need, somewhere safe for them to go where they're out of the wind and the rain. And so not having outbuildings can mean, oh, you're scrambling to get a shed or to get something built.
This is why people end up with goats in their living room, guys.
Yes. I actually had a client who they lived in a old milking barn, and they told me a story on how when they were growing up, their horse would actually just walk into the house.
Oh boy.
Yeah. And that was they were just like true farmers, just living on the land.
I have had a rooster come into my house. In general, chickens don't I don't train my chickens to be pet chickens. So they're not, come pet me sorts of chickens. But I had this one rooster who just took a liking to me. And it got to the point where I could not leave my door open if I was in the kitchen canning, which in the summertime I was doing that instead of running the AC, which was still hot. But, it's kind of like a losing battle if you can your stuff inside in Tennessee in August. So I just had the door open and I am canning tomatoes. And all of a sudden he walks up behind me and just crows inside my house. I just about jumped out of my skin first. And then I'm like, get out before it poops on my floor, because chickens will just poop everywhere.
No, I think they're attracted to surfaces you want clean to poop. Like they'll go up on our porch because they found that we occasionally have cat food up there. And then they'll just sit there and poop. Or they'll sit at the door and just look inside at you, being like, hey, what's going on?
Are you in there?
Yeah. We a bunch of those chickens we had to get rid of because they were getting old, and so the new batch hasn't figured it out, thankfully.
Yeah, you can actually set things up so they don't. Or Jack Spirko trained his dogs to chase the chickens off his patio, which is great. But he also ended up putting an anti-duck and chicken defense fence up there too, because every so often one of them just gets it in their head and then everybody else follows.
Unfortunately, our cats are kind of scared of the chickens.
Mm-hmm.
So a chicken, well, actually, our cats are kind of funny. Pretty much anything can walk up to the porch and start eating their food, and they just sit there and watch. Like, don't you care about your food? Because I know in an hour when it's all gone, you're going to be bugging me for more.
Yeah, cats don't care. They only care if the other cats are getting the food.
Yeah,
pretty much. My cats are that way. So, well, what about like local codes, neighborhoods, that sort of thing? What sorts of traps should you avoid if you're looking to homestead when you're looking for land or land with something on it?
Yeah, definitely make sure you check out any restrictions on the property, deeded restrictions in particular. Once you start getting 15 plus acres, it's uncommon to come across that. And in some cases, zoning can be superseded if you're in Greenbelt. And so that can be useful, but you can still have restrictions, deeded restrictions on a property, even if the property can go Greenbelt. And so you definitely need to be checking out that. It should be it should be a question that is answered either before you put in an offer or during the inspection period. I thankfully haven't had any gotchas because I've always tried to pay attention to that, but it's certainly something that you could run into, and it's important to know because it's not uncommon for there to be a restriction of no chickens or no roosters or a limit on the number of chickens. It's exceptionally common to have no pigs, even if it's just one, no pigs. There's not nearly as many restrictions on horses or cows usually, but there'll be no commercial operations a lot of times. But again, I always, the more rural you get, the less likely you are to run into it, but it does happen. As far as zoning goes, usually if you're not within city limits and you're not in a metropolitan county like Davidson County, for instance, you're usually pretty good. Every county is a little bit different, but Tennessee is thankfully a pretty farmer friendly state. I can't speak to other states, but Tennessee is pretty farmer friendly. And like I said, the greenbelt tax exemption, if you have 15 plus acres, does allow you to supersede a lot of the zoning stuff for farming purposes.
Yes, you have to have a business plan and make money on the property for that, though, too. A lot of people just have a forestry plan to get greenbelt. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's like, I have trees. I harvest trees every 20 years, and here's my plan to harvest my trees. If you go into greenbelt, you can't then add a house where the trees are if that's what you've told them you're doing. So it's important to know that, I think, about greenbelt
Mm-hmm.
without paying back your tax break.
Yeah. Yep. There's definitely some gotchas there, but I would say overall it's a pretty great program for people who actually do want to do some farming. And a lot of people that I know that are in the agricultural greenbelt, not the forestry one, they just have a farmer come and do hay, and they're able to meet the requirements of greenbelt just from that. So,
Yeah, I know farmers who haven't done anything with their land for years.
hmm it doesn't seem to be well regulated. You kind of get in it, and whether or not they're actually going to check it is a big question.
Yeah.
So
We don't want it well regulated, guys. So,
no, and I mean
freedom
honestly,
hat is on his head for a reason, I'm sure.
yes. And you know what? My perspective is if these people are buying this land and they're just sitting on it, they're still doing everyone a favor because now that land's not being developed and we're still having, ecosystems for bees and, maybe they're getting it hayed and that hay is going to help other people.
Yeah,
Um,
or they're raising deer and turkey.
yeah. So I'm big on farmland preservation. I know there's always got to be some sort of development going on. I mean, population is expanding. Even if people weren't moving here, it's still expanding, and people got to live somewhere. But we also need to support our farmers and preserve as much farmland as we can.
Yeah, the scary part about that is so I'm from Oregon originally, and I watched the farmland in Oregon get destroyed with zoning and land use rules under the guise of preserving farmland. And what happened is they ended up pushing the small farmers out with the zoning rules because you couldn't do anything with your land. So like if you did need to sell an acre or 5, couldn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
And then you lost it. And then developers could afford to get it rezoned, and then it got developed. So it ended up being a tool to hand farmland over rather than do what they said, which was preserve it. And now if you want to buy a farm in Oregon, they're very expensive. Like, farms are attainable here. They're not as attainable in 2024 as they were in 2018 or 2017, but they're still attainable.
Mm-hmm.
In Oregon, millions.
Yeah, and unfortunately, that pushes out your family farmer. Because most of them simply aren't going to be able to afford that sort of thing, and then it just becomes big factory farms or large corporations owning land again.
Or they rezone it and they put one of the McMansion developments out.
Yeah,
A lot of that there.
yeah. So I mean, I'm a fan of the free market, and so I think that people should be using their own funds to purchase this land. And my opinion is just sitting on land is generally speaking a good investment because we're not growing any more of it, and so usually, you know, historically speaking, it's going to go up in value. So even if you can't make a lot of money on it year to year, you're preserving the land and you're hedging yourself against inflation.
Yeah, land can be a great hedge against inflation. You probably don't know this about me. Most people don't if they're kind of newer into my network, but I worked in public policy for a long time
Oh, cool.
for libertarian think tanks around the country. And I was friends with a guy who specialized in just learning about smart growth, land use planning. And the problem it's trying to solve is loss of farmland. They're trying to push people into dense environments. They say that's more environmentally friendly. And what it really does is give the tool to the local municipality or the state to increase density of the services they're providing, right? Like utility services, which is better for them because you don't have to move the water or the power or the sewage or the roads as far. And then that system works for the utilities. What he found out, because what he found out is when they use zoning and the land use planning practices that are called smart growth now, that are just like popular, they do the opposite of what they say they're going to do. And it's a bigger environmental gut bomb for dealing with the garbage and the sewage and the pollution that comes out of that. And he then looked at examples where developers are required to put in infrastructure in order to develop. If you just make the developers put in the roads and all of those, the sewage, the whatever that needs to go, that naturally limits how growth happens based on what the population needs and works a lot better, which is basically the free market in effect. So rather than making the city pay for infrastructure installation, when that cost goes to developers, it's amazing how the things that are built serve what the people want and work. So then you don't have to like force people into an area because they're there because they want to be there.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've seen some of that I'm in Marshall County, and there was some sort of backroom deal that went on, and a new industrial park was created, even though we already had an old industrial park and it had plenty of space in it. And this new industrial park was built really far away from the city. And so they annexed all the way out. I mean, it's miles and miles away from the city, and they annexed it all the way out, built out all the infrastructure there. As far as I'm aware, the city paid for all of it to make a second industrial park, which has like 3 businesses in it. And it never would have happened naturally, never. But the government got involved, and I'm sure some hands got greased, and
they always do. They probably got federal block grants for that.
It's possible. I don't know.
Rural development or rural improvement to take the poverty out of Marshall County.
Something along the lines, but it was definitely not a free market design, because it wouldn't have ever happened. It was too expensive.
Yeah. Okay, let's get back to what we're supposed to be talking about, finding the right property. Okay. Lots of people who listen to me are looking for a homestead. So you've come to the right place, my friend. There are kind of 2 ways you can go about this when you're at the point where you can buy it. You can buy something like what I bought, which had a house already and some infrastructure, or you can buy raw land and build it how you want it. Which way is the way to go?
That's going to depend on how much work you want to do. That it's a fair bit of work and money to develop raw land, and that's why you're going to see a completely untamed piece of land be a lot cheaper. If you've got a property that has cleared land and it's been hayed for a while, or they've got it as pasture for cows or whatever, they've got fencing in, there's some water infrastructure, you're going to pay 2 to 3 times as much for that. So it's partially going to come down to budget, how much work you want to do, and whether or not you're advised properly on the work of bare land. So because with bare land, the first rule of business is going to be clearing those trees out, and that can cost a fair bit of money. I mean, it's going to depend on where you're at, of course, but you're going to have to get the land clearing companies out there, get you quotes, and go through clearing it. And then after it's cleared, that land is destroyed, and you need to, whatever land clearing company goes out there, you need to make sure that they don't leave holes all over the place and ruts and all
like
kinds
Mars,
of stuff.
like the moonscape.
I've seen some. I went to a property last year, and they were busy clearing it, and it was really bad. I mean, they were mid clearing, so maybe they cleaned it up a bit, but there was piles all over the place. There was huge ruts. There was like holes in the ground from where they took the trees out by the roots. It was really rough. But a company that does a good job and clears it out, and then you go out after and put any amendments in the soil that you need, plant some grass, do anything that you need. I've seen some properties in fertile areas be ready for cows in just over a year, if you do it right. But you are going to be having that extra lead time. I wouldn't assume a year. I would assume 2 or 3 years before you can really use it. And so that's something you got to think about. Now, if you're not caring as much about the grass for cows and other animals, and you're just going straight into gardening, you're going to be able to use that a lot sooner, of course. There might still be some roots and stuff to run into, but you could till it up a bit and add some fertilizer and compost and stuff in and be pretty good there. But yeah, it can take a bit of time and money to get land cleared. And then if you're going to have animals, you're going to need fencing, of course. And fencing is pretty expensive. It's
It's
if you
not
want good
hard
fencing.
work at all either, is it?
No, it's super easy. It
Super
doesn't take
easy.
time at all. No, it's pretty expensive. I mean, green treated posts, for instance, have just gotten insanely expensive. I think they're probably 3 times the price they were just 5 years ago. And then metal has gone up a lot as well. So you're probably paying about twice the amount for a good field fence. Now, the nice thing is they recently changed the sales tax agricultural exemption to allow you to exempt sales tax on fencing. So that's really nice because you can save 10% basically on everything you buy, assuming you have sales tax exemption beforehand. And the other nice thing is if it's done right, it'll last a really long time. We just replaced the section of fencing along the road that was from the 80s. And it was in pretty bad shape. It probably should have been replaced 10 years ago. But, a good field fence should last many decades.
Yes. And when you're putting fence in on your property and you have a stretch of crappy fence from the 80s and no fence other places, you usually prioritize the other places.
Yes. And that's what happened. I mean, we prioritized some other spots, and then the fencing got to be about 3 feet tall. And one of our cows just was like, oh, hey, look, there's some grass on the other side, and just hopped right over. And so what we ended up doing was putting in some temporary fencing, which I should plug some temporary fencing. Poly wire with a energizer is super effective fencing. It works great for pigs. It does not work at all for chickens, but it works great for pigs, and it's really great for cows, as long as pigs and cows are trained, on the fencing, and it's very inexpensive. So if you're
And
looking,
buy a charger that delivers a bigger shock than you ever thought you'd need.
yes, definitely. And so if you're, if you're trying to just jump, head first into it, it's pretty inexpensive to start, and it works really well.
Something I learned from Joel Salatin is when you want to put a fence up, put up a temporary fence. And if it's still there in 2 to 5 years, that's where you put your real fence, because you may find yourself moving it. That poly wire works great for that.
Yeah.
Tactical and I argue about where fences go a little bit, because he's ready to go all in and put them in. And when he puts a fence in, like, it's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
So we've done a combination of both.
We have some areas where we've had the poly wire 4 or 5 years.
That's okay.
And we're like, yeah, we really need to finish the fencing. But it's like you said, you have these other priorities. It's been on our to-do list for a long time. And, oh, well, we needed to make a greenhouse. We needed to put the fencing around the garden. And then the fencing along the road was tying up all of our poly wires, so we couldn't section our pasture off. And so we needed to do that so we could section the pasture off, because we had a bull and we needed to separate him from this female. And so a lot of, what you end up working on is driven by your needs at that time. And you're like, I didn't think that I would ever work on this at this point. And then
but here I am working on this. I just learned right before this podcast how to clean my spin down water filters.
Okay.
Which is a thing I didn't even know existed. And Tactical and I have a shared to-do list for the next 5 days, getting ready for the single digits we're getting, right? And it's like, we need to write it all down and then divide it up so it all gets done, so we're not like running around on Monday with like chickens with our heads cut off.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things is change all the water filters. Well, I have spin down filters that just got put in like a year ago, because we have suspended clay in the water, which is really hard to get out. And every time they need to be cleaned, I'm like, you need to clean those because I don't know how. Like, you need to teach me how to clean those so that more than one of us can clean those when they need to be cleaned. So if you're like at the tippy top of the pasture and they need to be cleaned, I can clean them. So that was like I have 15 minutes till we go live. I'm going to go learn something new.
That's how it always happens too.
Yeah.
Like, your poly wire snaps in one spot and it's raining out and you're like, well, I got to get this fixed.
Yeah, good times, good times. Have a good rain skirts are great on a homestead, by the way. Have you ever seen those?
Mm-mm.
It's hiking gear, and it's like a Velcro thing that goes around your waist. It goes down just below your knee, so it's a skirt, but it keeps the water off your legs, so you don't have to wear rain pants. I don't like wearing rain pants because they're hot.
Well, so that I don't know if you got all that wind.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So we have like 5 chicken tractors, and one of them I built it out of old chain link fence posts and bars, and so I got a bender and bent them. Well, those bars are like 20 feet long, and so when you bent it, this thing ended up pretty big and tall, and so then I stuck a tarp over it and wired it all down, zip tied it all down. Well, I discovered that it apparently is a really good air tunnel. And so when the wind picks up, this thing literally flies. And
Oh no.
I thought that if I turned it just right so that the air couldn't get, the long way and instead just hit the side, that it'd be okay. Yeah, that wind just picked it up and pushed it into our polywire fence and then flipped it up and over. And now it's halfway to the neighbor's yard.
And upside down probably now too.
No, somehow it stayed right set up. I think it's because it's bottom heavy.
Okay.
So it just sort of like hovers over the ground like a hovercraft. So I had to go out when it was like downpouring and fix the fence because it had fallen over. It had been pushed over, and I just uprighted it. And one of the bottom wires was busted, and I was like, it's good enough till morning when it's not raining, and cold, and I can barely see.
Yeah.
So.
That's the way that always. I'm always out in my PJs doing something in the middle of the night. Like when we first got our sheep, the first 6 months, more than one time, I was torn out of bed because something medical was going on.
Mm-hmm.
And I go out there, PJs, we deal with it. And then we get to this point where it's like, okay, the situation's stable. Tactical apparently must sleep in his clothes. I don't know, because he's always like fully dressed. And I'm like, okay, I'm willing to hang out with this lamb, but do you mind if I go in the house and put something warm on? Because it's freaking freezing out here and I'm in my PJs, which are now muddy. So
yeah, that's how it always
I bought
happens.
overalls over Christmas. I think if I can just get them staged to hop into the overalls on the way out of the house, it'll be much better.
Yeah, all the old school farmers have overalls. They're handy for sure.
Yeah.
I don't have them. My wife's got some, but we have a neighbor who he retired from cattle farming recently, but he's always wearing overalls.
Yeah. Well, and then on the website, they're like, these run really large. And I'm like, that's because you put them over your actual clothes.
Mm-hmm.
And it keeps your clothes from getting dirty.
Yes, that's smart.
So I think I'm going to do like the prepper thing where I stage them in my boots with socks.
Mm-hmm.
And I can just like step in and pull everything up and then go out the door when we get into lambing season, which is not quite here yet. So
yeah,
I hope.
Well, hopefully that works out well.
I'll let you know.
Yeah.
I'll let everybody know how that goes.
A couple other costs to think about as far as infrastructure this can apply to, land with a house, but if you need any water infrastructure put in place, maybe you have a well on the property, but maybe it doesn't produce enough to handle your farm needs. And then you either have to do rainwater collection or you got to pipe some water in from the county or whatever you got to do. There's a cost to that. If you need to either build a house, you got to run electric, or maybe you're going to build an outbuilding, you got to get electric to it. And there's cost involved in that, especially depending on how far away it is from the existing lines. In our county, Duck River Electric, they'll give you a pole as part of the hookup fee, and anything past that you pay for a pole. And so if you're like, you know what, I'm going to build on the top of this hill and it's a mile into my property, well, you're going to pay a mile of utilities, and it's
Yeah, or you're going off grid.
Yeah, or you're going off grid. If you don't have a driveway, like on raw land, you got to put in a driveway. Make sure the water is flowing around it so it doesn't wash out. If you got a barn and you're driving to and from it a lot, in February and March, it may not be drivable anymore. It may just be a big old mud pit. And so you may want to bring some gravel in and make it usable all year round. If you don't have a septic, you're going to have to get a septic put in, which compared to the Midwest, they're pretty cheap here because they don't have to dig them down 6 feet and they're not heavily regulated either. So that's nice. You just have to have an approved site and then get someone to come out and put them in. But utility costs can add up really quick depending on what you're doing, where you're located.
Yeah, if you think about it, when you're developing raw land, you become responsible for your utilities.
Yep.
And if you hook into it like city water or whatever, they then become responsible for getting it to you, but you're responsible once it's on your property, basically to the house. Like there's different stop points in different areas. Like in my area, electricity, they're responsible for getting it to my house, but the meter base is mine all the way into the house. So if something happens on the outside of the house between the meter base and going into my house, that's me. But that still requires me to get the power company out to turn everything off at the pole and, permit to deal with the problem and somebody to deal with the problem. I find, so since moving to the country from the city, there's just a lot more attention, knowledge needed to keep things going, even in the places where I'm hooked up to actual utilities. If you have a well system or a spring or whatever for your water or a rain barrel system, you are now the person, you are the plumber and the electrician and the water treatment center for that. And that's a whole different thing. It's very hard to find good information on that. I like it. Every time somebody says, what can I work on for homesteading? When I'm not ready for my homestead yet, I'm like, learn how to do something, learn plumbing, learn electrical, learn how to do water treatment. And then of course you can learn how to can food, grow food, all of those things. But getting the right person out who knows all that stuff when you're very rural is very hard.
Yeah. It's, I'm in real estate, obviously. And so I frequently have to get contractors out for stuff. And I still haven't found a great plumber. I know a pretty decent electrician. I know some guys, at least in my county, who can do excavation and grading work and stuff. But certain fields, it's really tough to find good, reliable people who know what they're doing. They do things right, and you actually want to have them out to a property.
And so, if you do find that person, they are backlogged.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yep. And so it is important to be able to at least take care of some basic things. The more rural you are, the more important it is.
Especially after a single-digit night on Monday.
Yes. Yeah. What are you going to do if the pipes under one of your sinks freeze?
Yeah. I hope you know how to fix that because it'll be fixed faster if you do.
Or at least you know where your water turnoff is so that you can stop the damage from going further before the plumber comes out.
Yeah. It's funny because knowing how to fix that, the reason I know how to fix that is because that has happened to me.
Yep. Unfortunately.
And I was like, I guess I'm learning this today.
Yeah. Adversity is the best trainer.
It is. And you're like, and at the end of the day, when it took you all day and 5 trips to the hardware store and you can finally wash your hands, you're like, this is so marvelous.
That's been every plumbing experience of mine. It's like, oh yeah, I'm going to take care of this. And I got all the supplies I need. 5 trips to the store later, I finally finish it.
So here's my cheat on that. It depends which store you're going to. What I learned is you don't go to Home Depot or Lowe's in my area. You go to B&G Plumbing and Electrical because the guys who work there do this.
They actually know what they're talking about.
And so then I'll say, this is what's going on. These are the pictures. Give me everything I need and everything I need for the contingencies, and I will come back and return it. And often I only have to go there up to 2 times. And I'm like, and then what time do you close? And like, get there first thing in the morning because you're going to need the time.
Well, so our house is about just under 100 years old. But it's had so many owners and so many people do stuff to it that we've got PEX piping, we've got CPVC piping. Thankfully, someone ripped out the old galvanized, but we have so many different things that I never know what I'm getting into until I start getting into it. And so, I didn't know that I needed this one piece because I couldn't tell until I took the whole thing apart.
Yeah, that's 100% how it is here. And then the guy who built the house was a boiler maintenance guy. So occasionally I'll have boiler parts in my
Okay.
plumbing. I made a decision early on to change everything to PEX when something broke. So if I had an issue with a valve at the toilet, I would rerun in PEX from my latest PEX spot all the way to the toilet at that time. If it wasn't just like a quick fitting switch, because now it's 100% PEX here, my whole life is easier.
Yeah.
But that took me 17 years to do.
Yeah.
It was more like 15. I think it was 15 years in that we finally had the last CPVC or PVC out, depending on if it was hot or cold water. Yeah.
Yeah, that's nice. I mean, PEX is super handy. We don't have a ton of it just in the new spots.
Yeah.
But we haven't really, outside of when we remodeled our bathroom upstairs, we just haven't had to do a ton of plumbing, just changing fixtures out here and there. But we have some plans for an area of our house where it'll require a lot of new plumbing. So yeah, we'll do PEX for that.
So let's go back to something you kind of said in passing and dive a little more deeply into it. I gave the example of 100 acres, and you said, do you even need 100 acres? Like, how do you plan what size you should buy or how much land you could buy? Because yes, maintaining 100 acres, especially if you don't have a tractor, isn't going to happen. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah. So, it goes back to the very first question, what are your homestead goals? If your goal, and you're really firm on this goal, is to have 100 head of cattle, yeah, you're going to need more land. If you, are wanting to more just, okay, I want to garden an acre, which is a big garden, and I want to have some chickens and a couple of cows, you don't need 100 acres. Do you want 100 acres? I want 100 acres. I want 200 acres, but I don't need it. And so a lot of people, they don't need it. Now, if you can afford it, go for it. That's awesome. But if you're like most people and you're on a budget and you need to be thinking about where every dollar goes, then, you may be better off going a little bit smaller and, having something that fits better. If you could buy 100 acres of raw land or 10 acres of a ready to go homestead, that 10-acre ready to go homestead may be a much better choice depending on your situation, especially if you haven't done this before, because you're going to have that 10-acre homestead and you're going to be like, wow, they got all this stuff ready already and I didn't have to do any of it. And this is great. Like, my learning experience is a lot better. And so, that just may be a better option, but if you're thinking big and you're dreaming big and you want to do a lot, then more land is certainly better. Now, one thing really cool about Tennessee versus a lot of other states is we get a lot of rain, and we tend to have, as long as your land's not super rocky, we tend to have really fertile soil. And so our grass grows like crazy. I mean, you could, at least on our property, we could mow every 4 to 5 days to keep it down. And so you can support more cows on, an acre than you could in other areas, which is nice. So you can do more with less here.
Yes, but it's better not to like go in your first year with the maximum number that you think you need to.
Yeah, because I mean, if you've got 100-acre property and it's almost all wooded, you don't really have to do much maintenance on that if you don't want to. I mean, if there's some down trees, you should probably try to take care of them because they'll be a hazard. But you don't have to do, a whole lot. But if you've got a property where someone already spent the money to clear it, you're going to really kick yourself, if you don't keep it cleared. And so that's going to require that you either have a tractor to do at least a once or twice or 3 times a year, bush hogging, or you're going to have to, find someone who can do it for you.
Or you need to run ruminants through it on a cycle that will keep it up.
Yeah, but even then, there's stuff cows aren't going to eat. We get some thistles and some broom sage in our pasture sometimes. They don't eat any of that stuff. And, so even in our situation where our cows are on almost all of our field, we still got to go out there 1, 2, 3 times a year and just, do a quick bush hog.
See, this is the benefit of sheep.
Yeah. They'll eat everything.
They won't eat everything. Goats will eat more than sheep. Somebody in here was saying they were going to use goats to clear. Had I known how much sheep will actually eat in the forest and in just like underbrush land, I would have never gotten goats. I would have just gotten sheep because they eat enough. Yeah. But that is a way to get through all that crap that the cows won't eat.
I don't have experience with sheep, so I can't say, but that sounds pretty awesome.
Yeah. It's not the end all be all, but yeah.
We have a belted Galloway, and they're, from Scotlandish area. And so they're more used to a more sparse forage, and so they eat a bit more. And so, I mean, they do a pretty good job about eating most stuff and stepping on it and everything. But who wants to eat spiky thorns outside of strange animals like goats?
Like goats. Exactly.
So, and sometimes, depending on how, good your pasture management is, and I'll be honest, ours is not always great. Unfortunately, we have situations like this fence is broken over here. We can't split our pasture up into two because our poly wire's all over there. And so then some parts get a little overgrazed, and you notice some weeds coming in. You're like, okay, we got to get out there and be really diligent about, clearing this area out this year. And then, the next year when you were diligent, then your grasses are coming back better.
Great. Well, if people want to get in touch with you or reach out to you to learn more or talk more about this, or maybe, I don't know, hire you as a real estate agent, how do they do that?
You can go to our Instagram. It's Tennessee_realtors. You can also go to my website. It's parker-realtors.com. Or you can just call me, 931-998-0688. Take text messages or phone calls.
Awesome. And guys, if you're listening to the audio podcast, I have all his links in the show notes. And if you are watching this on YouTube, I put your website in the description. So if people are interested, they could reach out to you. Anthony, thanks so much for being on the show today.
I got one other thing. My wife just reminded me. We're doing a couple of classes, and we'll go over some of the same stuff that we went over today, but it'll be a little bit more in depth about buying land and homesteads and stuff. And so the first one is on Monday. And so if you go to our Instagram, we have some sign up form there. So anyone who's interested, it's just a free class information. Doesn't matter if you're from out of state. I have someone from California who's going to be coming in, and I don't believe they're intending on moving here. So
is it a digital class or an in-person?
Yep, it'll be a Zoom class. Yep.
Okay, so there's a free Zoom class Monday, which is Monday, January 15th. Is that the 15th?
That's 15th, and that one's at 7 p.m. And then we're also doing one on the 27th. I think that one's at noon.
7 p.m. Central. I'll make sure your Instagram is in the show notes so people can check that out. And if you want to learn more, it's a great way to do it. Thanks so much for being on.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me.